For people listening that might not know who you are, might not have seen your work, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm Mathushaa Sagthidas. I'm a London-based photographer, and a lot of my work is kind of like cultural documentation, I would say, but it's also a bit of fashion photography. It takes like a very fashion photography approach to it, but a lot of it, like most, especially my personal work, really revolves around exploring my own personal heritage or South Asian culture in general, and can sometimes take like a still life approach, as well as taking a bit more of a fashion approach.
And how did you get into that? Was photography and art something that you'd on fashion as well, something that you'd always just been interested in, or was there a turning point for you?
100% there was a turning point. Before, like, I always just knew that I was a creative person, and like back in school, like from like year nine, I don't know, like, from a really young age, I just knew that in the long run I wanted to do something creative. I had no idea what exactly, and I didn't know if you could get a job like at this point in the creative industry, and I didn't know what that would entail. And a lot of the stuff that I was doing in school up until like year 13 was a lot of like more fine art based work. So a lot more like drawing, sculpture, um, that kind of thing, really, and like painting as well. And then I think when it came down to like year 13, when you get that pressure of like you got to go uni, where are you gonna go? Which was ridiculous because it was so like my school really precious about uni, but never talked about any other opportunities like apprenticeships and maybe even going straight into work, little things like that, which was really, really irritating. But I remember just being not ready for uni because I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I also didn't want to do something and then regret it and then drop out all these things. Also because I was like, oh, my parents would kill me if I dropped out. So I ended up actually doing a foundation year because I spoke to my teachers about it and they suggested that would be best. But just before that, I'd also taken a photography workshop. So when it came to me deciding what foundation I would do, I really wanted to do one that gave me a bit of chance to explore photography a little bit more. But I did kind of do that, but I ended up doing fashion promotion. And that's kind of how I got into fashion photography because that was like an element, a part of the course. And then ended up doing photography at uni. That's kind of how I got into it.
It's really interesting to hear about how, because I think before people have I've interviewed about their passions, about their careers, they've been kind of like, oh yeah, I've always sort of been into it, like it's always I've always known I was going to do it. But it's interesting to hear a story where there definitely was a definite, okay, this is what I'm a lot more interested in this now, this is what I want to pursue, sort of thing. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting to hear that story. So you mentioned before about how a lot of it is like cultural documentary type stuff that you cover. Why is it so, or is it important to you to cover that element of stuff, and also your own sort of your own being, your own heritage as well? Why is it that that is something that you want to explore within your work?
So I think when it comes to like South Asian culture in general, I think for me it was just I've always had an interest and I always wanted to explore that part of me. And I think like like most South Asian kids who've grown up in a westernized country, I feel like a lot of us most of the time have spent so much time with family and all this kind of thing and weren't phased about being South Asian, or for me like being Tamil and things like that. And then it's when I started school and moved, like when I moved to like northwest London where it's a bit more like no, like the area I live in isn't like predominantly brown, it's more like white dominated. You start to notice difference in you and people making comments here and there, and you want to fit in right at that age. So I started to distance myself from my culture, and then I think in the back of my mind, I always wanted to explore it and go like reconnect with it. And I think my best way of doing that was through art. And also on top of that, like I think when I started doing a lot of projects like this, I started to notice that like one thing that was really irritating with uni and the educational environment is a lot of them when it comes to creative stuff, they want references from galleries, from Google, all these kind of things, just various references. But the things that I was interested in, it was so hard to find references. And when it came down to finding references, I feel like before like the Black Lives Matter movement happened and then galleries started to notice a lack of like POC representation in terms of artists, in terms of their spaces. Before that, I just felt like a lot of the artwork that you would find is just stolen art, and majority of the time, like if you go to like V&A British Museum, majority of the time the things that are stolen tend to be mainly like religious artifacts. And yes, I feel like religion plays into culture, but it's not the culture completely. So I feel like there's still so much missing. And I think for me, that was just really frustrating that a lot of like the work out there is so rare to come across someone who was telling like a South Asian story from an authentic perspective as well. Like that was like such a big thing for me. And yeah, that's kind of I think how I got into the work that I create. And then in terms of more of like my personal projects really revolving around my identity, it was my way of kind of like, because like my parents are Sri Lankan, but we say we're Tamil because of everything to do with the war and the history of the war. And it was my way of like really like I think when I was younger I was just a bit scared to like ask certain questions because I didn't want to bring up certain traumas and whatnot. But then the older I get, the more curious I was, of course, to know like what happened, to know a bit more about their history as well and their perspective of what happened in the war. That was my kind of way of exploring that, and through that I really like, I think with when I was asking questions like this, I just knew that it became really important to me to like really maintain my culture and really highlight that and showcase that and show people it exists. When you hear so many stories and like everything about Tamil genocide and how like people tried to eradicate Tamil identity, it does suddenly become really important to you to maintain that. And that's something that's happened over the like I would say like the last 5 years. And I think that's why it's really important for me to put out that kind of work, as well as it's for myself, but it's also to show that this has happened, like this is part of our history, but so many people might not know of it.
No, definitely. That's really like inspiring to hear, and definitely, I think it's interesting because obviously what you're talking about, the history of the Tamil genocide and all of that is obviously such a big thing, but it's also one particular story.
Yeah.
Like it's interesting because it's such like it's got such a big magnitude, but then at the same time there are so many different other stories as well. So if that in itself is one particular story and that itself is such relevance, such moving and emotional background to it, then imagine what all the other elements as well, if you just bring it together and appreciate and understand that there's not just one set way of being quote unquote South Asian,
Yeah.
essentially.
There's
Definitely.
exactly, there's like so much to our history, and I think that was what was really infuriating. I think like I remember growing up and like you remember like in school and like history lessons and stuff, and the only thing they really constantly talk about was like the World War. And for me, like, yeah, that's like of course acknowledge it, that is important. But then if this is a city, like especially London, that claims to be like multicultural and like uses diversity as a selling point or whatever to attract people, then why is it in school and education when like my school was predominantly like POC, but then like you didn't acknowledge any other like war or history that much, and that was really infuriating. So I think it was part of the reasons why things like that, why I create the work that I create, because so many people don't acknowledge it, and like it's just irritating that they don't.
Thinking about the South Asian perspective as well, I'm presuming I'm right in assuming that even when they covered the World War, it wasn't like they covered, for example, the participation of South Asians
Yeah, of
or
course
yeah,
not.
in that. Yeah.
Yeah, of course not. It was all about like what happened in Britain, not really much about who helped out. That
Yeah.
was really annoying as well.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely a common issue that is still going on with the British education system to this day. But that's a totally other topic to
That
look
is. That's a
into.
whole other topic.
But yeah, let's focus more on not just brown, not just Indian. So I've realized we've kind of been talking like um in bits about it, but we haven't necessarily explained to the listeners what this project actually is. So do you mind just explaining what not just brown, not just Indian is all about and how it came to fruition? Like, is it something that you've had in your mind for a while, or did it come about throughout lockdown? I think I might have read in your impress. Just let me know.
Yeah, it kind of did come about in like it was something I essentially wanted to do in final year. Like I think after my experiences in uni, like God, I'm really spilling the tea here. But like I remember in like second, I think it was like second year, or can't yeah, it was second year where I was creating some work, and because of what I struggled to find online and in like gallery spaces and whatnot, a lot of my references became like my family history, family photos, objects that I had at home. And I remember like back in uni, they said like, that's not enough. You need to find artists online, whether that you just create a one-off piece just to pass, you need to be able to do that. And that for me, that was really infuriating, because I'm like, I want to create, like, you're telling me this is a course in space where I can create what I want to create, but then why is it I face so many more limitations compared to someone else? And like that, little things like that really started to infuriate me. And I remember finally I wanted to create this project, but then pandemic happened and it was just not possible in terms of like just the amount of people I had on board for each shoot. It was just not allowed. So, and then I then had to like change it up completely and create something different, which I'm still quite proud of, because it was a project that really revolved around like Tamil history and also around my mum, and like I got her really involved in the creative process, which I'm actually grateful, because I don't think would have happened if it wasn't for lockdown. But at the same time, of course, I would have loved to have done this then. But like stuff happens, and I managed to one thing that was really amazing is when I managed to win some funding, and that's when I was like, do you know what? Like, I remember like I was given so many options of what I could do with the funding, because they were quite like free about it. And they said like, it's for your creative practice. And the first thing that came to mind was like, no, I want to do this project, because I don't know when I'm going to be able to get another opportunity like this. Because part of the reason why I wanted to do it in uni is because you would get the studio access. So I thought, let me use the funding to build this. And that's kind of how it came about. In terms of like the whole process of it and like really developing it, like I had a lot of factors in mind and how I wanted it to go. Like one key thing for me was like when it came to South Asian women, I feel like there's this just massive stereotype and culture around just our lives being so centered around arranged marriages and just marriage in general. And like when you look into like South Asian culture or South Asian women on Google, so much comes out about marriage. And even when you look into like, for example, Bengali culture or any of this or that, there's so much that comes up really revolving around marriage. And for me, that was just really irritating, because that's not the only thing that's to our culture. There's so much more, and there's so much more that you do not find on Google, like the things that we have grown up doing that we just know of, but you don't really see much of online that people aren't aware about and just make assumptions. So I had certain things like I didn't want it to look anything, I didn't want it to look bridal at all. I wanted to be quite stripped back, and for each one I kind of wanted to focus on like a certain concept, but it was really important for me to work with people from those like that have like a respective like heritage from each of those countries, because one other key thing for me was, if I'm going to do this, I want to do this from an authentic and genuine perspective, because so much work revolving around South Asian culture that I found online was created by someone who wasn't South Asian, and they just took like a couple of photos in this country and things like that, and sometimes those had to be my references, and that was really irritating. So I kind of just worked with the people from each of those countries for each team to really build the like concept. It was a very collaborative process. It was also really nice because I'm also quite a sentimental person, and one thing I did do is include elements of each person who was involved, like whether they were behind the camera or in front of the camera, because showcasing their lived experience was such an important part of this project, because that is the reason why I did it. It's yes, to show like to showcase aspects of our culture, but also just more from the experience of someone who's lived in that culture, that has grown up doing these things, and that's like a normal thing to them, and for people to actually understand of what it really, really means.
I really enjoy that element of touching on each individual person. I think that's so nice, rather than just, like you say, typical thing is Googling, getting a few bullet points, just ticking off
Yeah,
the boxes.
like
Like,
that was like the last thing I wanted to do, because I'm like, I'm so sick of what you find on Google. And even when it came to me trying to research, like, because one thing, like, of course, like for me, this was also a massive learning process about each like South Asian culture. And if I wanted to understand more, kid you not, when I Googled things, I couldn't find anything. So I had to go to the girls, which I didn't mind, but it just shows like this is part of the reason why I did it, because there's not enough research or explanation onto our culture on like a really deeper level. So that's kind of also why I went to the girls as well. And also like I think there's just something beautiful about showcasing aspects of things that they've grown up doing. Because I think for them that a lot of them are saying like, which I is for me, this part's bittersweet in the sense of like, a lot of them were saying that they hadn't really seen a project like this before, or someone who's wanting to actually highlight their culture from an authentic perspective before. And it's both like an amazing thing that I'm glad that they can finally see that, but it's also like, in 2022, have we not seen that? And that's why I say it's bittersweet.
On the one hand, it's like so commendable that you are trailblazing in that sense, but then it's also like you say, it's like, why are you needing to trailblaze? Like, you really shouldn't need to.
Exactly.
And obviously we want people to go and look at and appreciate this art project, but maybe not um maybe not describing the photos in a sense, but do you mind just briefly going through the six areas and just again, I know I'm asking you to like kind of like be concise here, but do you mind just like kind of maybe for each one just giving a few examples of the type of ideas and type of sentimental stuff that you got into for them?
Breaking it down a little bit, I guess. So, for example, for India, I think a lot of the girls who were involved, who were in front of the camera, were creative as well, like super creative outside just modeling. So we focused on, well, we call it kolam in Tamil, but it's called Rangoli, and we focus, I think, on Holi and just creating that, the patterns from that, the things that you do like growing up when you're at home. Like one of the girls was saying that she does it with her grandma, and I just thought that was something really beautiful, and I think that's what we wanted to focus on. And I think that was one of the reasons why we did that. That one was like one of the first shoots that we actually did. So for us, for like the entire project, that was really my way of figuring out how is this actually going to go. So that one was like a massive learning curve for me in terms of the structure. And then I think the one we shot after was Afghanistan, which was like a really beautiful one actually. But that one, I'm glad that one of them focused on this, because I feel like in South Asian culture, family is such an important part of your lives, and they're so involved in so many aspects of your life that it was important for me to kind of highlight that. So with this one, we kind of focus more a little bit on childhood memories, essentially kind of things that you do growing up, like back in Afghanistan or like with your family. And the girls involved in the shot were actually cousins, and the two girls behind who were doing like the creative direction, styling and makeup were also cousins. So little things that we did is like, the reason why there's like a kind of bright blue background is because the girls behind the camera were saying like, growing up when they used to go back home and see their family and see their grandma, they just remember seeing like a bright blue house that their grandma lived in. So it's the little things like we like that we did, and like the way we set it up and had everyone dressed up like the girls in the shot had like matching fits that they've just had from their family, that I was just really, because we had like different cultural fits that they wear, but then also I wanted to include an element of the things that they've done and things they've just been gifted by their family. That was one of them. With Nepal, it was actually different. I stripped that back quite a lot. That one was a massive learning curve for me, because in Nepal, like, you wear certain traditional clothing which reflects like the caste that you're from. So I didn't know that, like, I think caste is a massive thing across South Asia, but I think it really varies from culture to culture in terms of its importance, because I don't wear certain clothes that reflect my caste, you can't really tell. But with them it's quite a big deal. So with the traditional fit that they wear, it is a big part of it, shows that where they are from. So I kind of really wanted to focus on the importance of that. So I was like, I want to do a stripped back set, and I didn't want anything around, because I was like, I want the clothes to be the focus. Um, with Pakistan, we kind of focused on beauty rituals, which I think is a nice element, because a lot of them kind of, certain things do cross over and certain things don't, and it was kind of nice to learn about the history of it. Um, and then with Tamil Elam at Sri Lanka, we focused. That one was just more like, it's kind of like focusing on our grandparents like generation, and more so like more like a memory or thing that you can picture back home, kind of things that they would just sit outside doing, like grinding spices and cutting up fruit, little things like that, that we focused on for that. And I accidentally managed to hit like my mum's grandparents generation with the way the set was and the clothing was, because we didn't do any blouses, because we wanted to really be like how it was back then before colonization and all that. And that one of course has a special place in my heart, because it's my culture. but also because I got like my mum has seen it and loved it, and it just thought it was that I got it right, and just hearing that, knowing that I actually got that right meant a lot. With Bangladesh, we focused on their New Year, so Poila Boishak, which is also the same day as Tamil New Year, which was fun to learn. And that one was probably like my busiest shoot, but they just said it's just perfect because that's how it is on like New Year. There's so much going on, there's so much food about. It's just always like a busy, hectic house, and there was just something really beautiful about that.
Thank you for going through that. It's it's nice because I think I can kind of tell from looking at the project at first and looking at the different photos, you can kind of see the different, you can get what you're getting at in terms of the different cultural practices, in terms of how each culture in each place is so different in itself. And then also when I've read the accompanying press pack, I can kind of tell that, but hearing you actually say it in person as well adds a completely new sort of element to it. So thank you
Yeah.
for that.
No, it's okay. This is the thing. I really like, I think that's why I wanted that, like, it was really important for me to write a little something about it, because I felt like, yes, you'll see the images, and I think it's so clear that I'm looking into these cultures and looking into these traditions and whatnot. Yeah.
Mm.
But I feel like most people who are going to pick it up, majority of the time, the people who are from those respective cultures. But without like the certain little elements, like the one, for example, the one for Afghanistan, me focusing really on family, you wouldn't be able to tell if I didn't say it. So it was so super important for me. That's like really why I wanted to get the project out there, because it would give me an opportunity to write and speak about it a bit more, but also have some of the girls speak about why they got involved as well.
I think as well, going back to the whole idea behind the project, which is, again, not just brown, not just Indian, there's no one way to be a South Asian woman. Um, what to you, what do you think that is? Like, obviously, we're going completely against that. We're saying there isn't one way, but what do you think the perception is? Like, what do you think when people think South Asian women, both people outside and inside of these communities, what do you reckon that perception is?
Part of the reason why I named the project Not Just Brown, Not Just Indian is because of my own personal experience. I think that was it was also one of the key reasons why I wanted to create this project. Like growing up, I had a lot of people outside the South Asian community just assuming that I'm Indian. And I got that so much. And I even had that within the South Asian community as well. And for me, it's infuriating because like for me it's like there's nothing wrong with being Indian, but when people then put an identity on you, like I used to hear people make certain comments like, oh no, I'm sure you must be Indian, I'm sure you must be Indian, you look too light-skinned to be Tamil. Like that one just really hit it there, you know, like that one was really, really irritating. And I know there's nothing wrong with being Indian at all, but like when someone tries to put a completely different identity to you that you are not from, it is annoying. And it just makes you feel like that they're not really acknowledging it, like it doesn't exist kind of thing. And like little things like that really infuriated me. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to create this project, to showcase there's so many different cultures and aspects to us, and that to also teach people that when you see a brown person, don't go and assume where they're from, because you don't know. Like I'd rather like someone just ask me like, what is your heritage, you know, like what's your culture, that kind of thing, rather than making assumptions. Because South Asia is massive. It's not just India there's so many more other countries, and even with India alone there's so many different cultures within India. Like that was really infuriating as well. So like I think it was very much about like, don't make assumptions.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also maybe not, I think within India, I think the different cultures would maybe go back to pre-colonization and the different kind of like princely state sort of idea. But also you've got to consider as well about how a lot of these what they're called boundaries and structures are colonial creations. So it's just sort of a thing of why are you compartmentalizing me into something that is essentially a British creation, like this idea of just being Indian in a sense. Like in one way we've got to like, I feel like you do need to kind of get into the nitty gritty of it and just appreciate the individual cultures of where everyone's from, because that's the actual authentic, that's what's been there for so many years, that's what's authentic to the land which these people are from, essentially. I think.
Exactly. And I think people just kind of completely forget about that. And I think because I think, well, I don't know, like people just always just assumed India was like the biggest like it is probably the biggest South Asian country, but them making assumptions about then you being Indian and majority of brown people being Indian, like so many of the girls who were involved in this project have heard that comment and have gone through that same experience, which is part of the reason why they got involved as well, because they were also, it is also infuriating when, because it feels like people are just completely unaware of like the other cultures that are there, and it's just, South Asia is such a massive like area, and like there's so many different cultures, that how are we not aware of it, especially living in a city that claims that is multicultural and diverse.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think what you said there, without explicitly saying it in terms of it is diverse, but also claims to be in terms of like
Yeah, but
yeah.
it is diverse, but then you use it as a selling point, but then
Yeah,
is it really, like, it's a really confusing one to say.
yeah. I realized I didn't ask actually with regards to the participants in the project, the models and the makeup artists, the camera crew, etc. How did you actually source them? Were they acquaintances from before the project, or were the people you found online?
That one was a mix. Like a couple of them are definitely, like, a couple of them are just really close friends of mine that I've just done a lot of projects with. Some of them are just artists and creatives that I just knew of and I wanted to get them involved. And then some of it, like, what was great about the funding, like having the funding, was that I was able to actually bring people down from like Birmingham and across the UK into London to be able to do the project, which was kind of useful because I'm like, I don't think I would have, unless I go to Birmingham or something like that, I don't think I would have worked with them anytime soon. So it was nice to be able to bring people down, but a lot of it was from Instagram, putting out so many call outs, having the people who were happy to get involved share it, having people just share it as well, which is really nice. Like having that kind of like supportive community, or like, actually, I'm very excited to see what it turns out like. Just sharing that really helped find so many more creatives. And then what was also great about it was connecting with creators outside of London as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's nice. The more people you have involved in a project from all over the place, the more feelers you obviously have to reach out to different communities, different people that you might not have reached before. So
That is true. That is very,
mhm.
very true.
Obviously don't need to go into the exact details of it, but just in case there's anyone listening who maybe would like to do a similar sort of project, or um any sort of like art, fashion, photography related projects, how do you actually go about getting funding? Is it just a straightforward application process, or
So the funding, I can't lie, that one's low key was a bit of a stroke of luck, because someone I know, actually, someone I've worked with, she just sent it to me on a whim kind of thing, being like, I've just come across this, I think you should apply. There's no harm in it. I think it might apply to you. And I was like, I looked at the application. It was a fairly easy application, because I know that certain funding, like from the Arts Council, for example, it can be a very like stressful process. There's a lot to it. There's so much you have to read and write. And I think that can be a lot. But with this one, it was quite a simple one. That I think was like 500 words at most. It was quite, and then I think I just went into details about the idea and project that I wanted to create, like what I would want to do with it. I also think I wrote about a couple of other things that I would potentially could do with the money as well, like in terms of buying equipment or doing other types of projects. And yeah, it was quite a like straightforward application. I would say funding still like that exists. Probably things like Grand Plan, which is like I think every month. They were shut for summer, but I think they're going to be opening up soon. They give out £1,000 every month to certain creatives. It's a fairly, that one's also a fairly easy application, so I would definitely say doing that. I've, before this funding, I'd applied for funding before, I had been rejected. Like sometimes I still do when I apply funding, you don't get all of them. Like, but I wouldn't, one thing I would say is don't take that to heart, because even with this one, I was very surprised when I got it, because I was like, I've actually won some funding now. What a miracle. But I would say just don't get disheartened by that and just keep applying, because you just never know.
yeah, no, and I'm really glad that you were able to get that, and obviously it's helped so much in terms of being able to keep that the project authentic in terms of
Yeah.
getting all these different people involved, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Definitely.
100%.
So what's the reception been like so far since you brought this out?
It's been really lovely so far. It's been nice, like a lot of the comments and like people messaging and people saying things are like a lot of it has been like it's so nice to see part of me in these photos, or like parts of like their like childhood and things that they've grown up doing being acknowledged. So that's really like gratifying. Like I'm very like because I created the project because I wanted to acknowledge the culture, but then to hear that it means like I've done it right. And in the sense of also I think doing it from like an authentic and genuine perspective, as in like from the perspective of the people who are in like who are from those respective backgrounds, has been really beautiful as well, because I did like I think if I did it with people who like obviously I wouldn't do this because it's a bit wrong, but if I did it with people who maybe were South Asian but not from exactly from that country, I think it would have been a very different outcome. And I think doing it with the people in those countries is just it meant I can really dive in deep into what they have grown up with. And it was also a massive like learning curve for me and learning from their like perspectives. So it's been really beautiful to hear that people actually can really see themselves in those images and can see a part of the things that they've grown up.
And as well, it's thinking about what you were saying before about not having a reference for when you wanted to do a similar sort of project in second year. It must be really inspiring to think, oh, someone might be able to reference your work in the future.
That was a that was one of the reasons why I think that's one of the reasons why I create the stuff that I create. Like it has like throughout this year, especially, I've had some people, actually reference my work, which is like a really amazing feeling because it's just like it's nice that I can like I'm doing that. I exist to kind of do that for you in that sense. Like I remember being in that position and studying art and being told that you need to find a reference and really struggling. So for then someone to come across me and find it so easy to be able to reference me and actually feel like, yeah, this is the kind of thing that I want to create or understand my work and things like that is just really, really lovely. And then also with this project, knowing that people can actually, reference it and be like, this is why she's created it. It's something that I can relate to. It's about that part especially that you can actually relate to it. Because I remember there's like in uni, like looking at all this artwork and so many people can relate to it, then most of the time like people who are from like a POC background couldn't really, they couldn't really understand it. And that was what was really infuriating for me.
Yeah, definitely. I really hope that this acts as not only for reference, but also as like a catalyst for this type of work to continue being made without hesitation, without barriers. Because that's the thing. Feel like it is just a sense of once someone's put their foot through the door, hopefully it opens up for many more people to follow in a similar manner. Definitely.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think a couple of years ago for sure I would not I was in like it because I think I was just in environments where it wasn't that great and I did feel so limited in what I can create and like being told that it wouldn't be interesting if I did this or that. Like this from a tutor, like back in foundation. Like foundation wasn't the greatest year for me. And I think it's kind of having all these kind of like experiences, like that year where I was told that it wouldn't be interesting if I did this about my culture, or this and that, from a woman who was obviously white and just did not understand anything about the culture and seemed like she didn't really want to be fair. It was just this is why it was so important for me to do this as well, because I was so sick and tired of hearing little things like that throughout like my creative practice, especially in like education. And then you come out and you're like, actually, no, I want to create more and more. Like that's the epiphany I had in like second year. And I was like, screw it, I'm just going to create this because this is what I'm genuinely passionate about. So one thing I would always say is if you do have ideas like this, do not let like because like certain environments you are in can probably aren't sometimes maybe aren't the greatest, but don't let that limit you because you'll probably potentially end up regressing not creating that work.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's like you shouldn't have to push to create that in sense of like you shouldn't have to sort of explain yourself and justify it, but at the same time you've got to keep fighting for it because it's so important and hopefully in doing that you'll maybe make it easy for people after you to be able to
Yeah, like
follow that
that
as well.
that's I think that's what keeps me going because I think for me it's more like it was infuriating that certain people could get away with, just creating whatever they want to create. But then if I want to create something that's a bit more personal about revolving around my culture, yes, you might not understand it, but it isn't necessary for you to understand it. Like at the end of the day, when I was in these environments, I was told that I could create whatever I wanted to create, the things that I was passionate about. And this is what I was passionate about. It wasn't about making it, you know, malleable for some people to understand and relate to. It wasn't about that, because 100% the environments I was in, I was majority at the time, I was just pretty much the only South Asian, like across uni or foundation. So for me, it wasn't about that. It was more like, I want to share parts of my story and history. And I'm so glad I did, because I think when I started doing that, especially across social media, I met more and more South Asian creatives as well. And that's been a really beautiful process. And a lot of people have asked me, like, have you met so many people? Have you, like, that's something I'm like really struggling to do. And like having like that community as well has been really, really lovely as well, in terms of just the support.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is really nice how that exists. And I think that's one of the benefits of social media and an online sense of community as well, in terms of you aren't restricted to purely the people that you see on a face-to-face basis.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So thinking towards the future now, obviously I imagine your current priority is focusing on not just brown, not just Indian. But looking towards the future, have you got anything future planned in terms of projects, or are you purely focusing on this for now?
I mean, I've got a couple like small, like 1 day shoots, like small like projects, probably like throughout this year. But my predominant focus is definitely going to be not just brown, not just Indian, and like I think there's like a lot of things that I want to do with it, and like I'm planning something quite exciting. I've not sat down and created it yet, but I've just got some ideas coming for it. But I think I'm just gonna take it slow. Like one other thing I'm like learning as an artist, because I think sometimes with social media there's this pressure to keep creating work and to keep that like presence going. But at the same time, I don't think it should be a thing. Like I just want to take it slow sometimes, like, you know, create like when I'm ready to create. So I don't think I'm gonna be doing any big projects anytime soon. Like this one took 5 months, like almost half a year to create. So I think for the rest of this year, definitely gonna take it slow. Might have something next year, who knows? It's very much about like what comes to my mind and what I'm also passionate and interested in as well.
Yeah, no, I think especially as an artist, that's the way it should be. Like you shouldn't feel forced to do stuff for the sake of making it, because it will inevitably lose that authenticity and inevitably therefore not deliver the same results. Like I think it's a shame, because I feel like maybe people who are in the managerial positions, or the people at the top who their sole job is essentially to just deliver art, might not understand that that's not the way that it works. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
yeah.
That is like the sad reality. Like people like it takes time. Sometimes for me, like the way my mind works, I think is that sometimes I'll just get like a random idea. Like I'll get a random idea and like, yeah, I want to shoot that. And sometimes it might be a shoot that I can even do in like a couple of hours on the day. Then there's other ideas in projects where I'm like, yeah, I want to kind of do this, but I need to flesh it out. Like it takes some time to really build it. Like there was this one project, like I had the idea in mind, but like it took like 2-3 months to really like only recently really finalize the concept and had visuals and kind of started to see how I'd want it to look. But that itself took a while. It really like it just really depends. But then at the same time, like you shouldn't like I used to when I was younger, I did used to feel a bit stressed out being like, oh, I feel like I'm not putting enough work out there, or I'm not producing it fast enough. And then like throughout the years, I think especially after creating this project, I realized like it's really not that important to be like that, because I know me and I'd rather create something that I've like I'm just really genuinely happy with each time I put it out, rather than something I'm just putting it out there for the sake of putting it out there.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you've been able to get to that position so early on in your career as well. Like, definitely, it's the way to be, rather than just churning out stuff for the sake of it. Definitely.
And also like you would just verge on a burnout.
That too, you got to think about yourself as well. Definitely.
Yeah.
So rounding things off, where is the best place for people if they want to have a look at the project and also just keep up with your work in general?
So probably socials. I've got like the same at across my socials at Mathux Photos. So at Mathux photos. Probably my site as well, but that's always like linked to in my Instagram and across like socials as well. So I'd say probably that. Instagram's probably the best. I'm most like active on there because I feel like it's a really nice way to share my work.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, I've only seen your Instagram recently, but I can also vouch for anyone that wants to follow it, especially with the fact you've been posting the project recently. I went on that and I was like, oh, this is very nice, like colors and schemes and everything.
Yeah.
So when you can kind of tell that someone's doing it with that in mind, sort of thing, like it's all just, yeah. I like that portfolio very much. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Taking some time to get there. I kid you not. Like I feel like this is like a little bit of advice for some artists because I feel like people see my page and think it just happened. Kid you not, my Instagram like 2, 3 years ago, like I think it was over the pandemic when it really changed. Looked so different. It was just random portraits, random photos, like kind of like more like things you'd post on holiday rather than like really like like photos that are like super creative. And like that this journey hasn't just come overnight. It has taken me some time to get to a position where I'm creating the work that I'm genuinely passionate about.
Well, I'm really glad that you've been able to get to that position, definitely, and I look forward to seeing more of it as well.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on today. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Yes, no, it's been really, really great. It's been really great chatting to you about the project and sharing more about what it took to get there.